Hello everyone, I'm EternalOpossum, and we're going to take a look at the Hell's Kitchen cast of Season 7. Oh. Okay, so I should probably get this out of the way. I'm not exactly crazy about this cast or this season in general. I understand there's some fan favorites, and the season does have its moments, but I felt for the most part the season just kind of spun its wheels. Unlike the previous 3 seasons, and hell, even Season 2, which I genuinely don't like, there's no chefs I would say are in my all-time favorites, mainly because I think the cast is, for the most part, pretty uninteresting. As such, ranking this cast from worst to best was pretty tricky, but I did it anyway. And let me tell you this, after watching the whole season, I ended up with perhaps the hardest cast to rank so far. Anyways, rules as always, there's some chefs I've talked about before, so if I don't go into detail, chalk it up to that, or just not having much to say about them. Jokes are not to be taken seriously, and out of the show shenanigans will not be factored into their ranking, only their time on the show. With that out of the way, let's rank every chef of Hell's Kitchen Season 7.
I was like, you think I'm pretty? I was like, my God, nobody ever thinks I'm pretty. Oh, that's good. I was like, something good is happening right now. Wonderful.
If it's not clear by now, I have a ridiculously high tolerance for a lot of chefs that many would usually dislike. My F tier category, which usually shows off chefs I just outright don't like at all, is actually the smallest category I have with only 5 chefs as of this moment. And hell, nowadays I wouldn't even put one of them in F tier because I don't get angry with their nonsense nearly as much. That being said, I do have my limits, and Maria happens to break that limit by simply being annoying. Not as annoying as someone like Matt or even Lacey, but she's up there by virtue of being a professional yapper. She just doesn't shut up, and even worse, she always sounds like she's been caught doing something she wasn't supposed to. She never sounds sincere. Oh, the fact she just casually drops the R slur doesn't help her case. The best thing about her is that Ramsey pretty harshly told her to fuck off when she got eliminated. Maria sucked.
You know what? Take my shoes, Jake.
So, Andrew is kind of a weird one for me. Like, insanely weird for me. His very first appearance where he presents his signature dish shows him admitting he not only butchers his own animals, not only eats them raw, not only says he wants to buy 2 walking coolers, but he's accompanied by some Hannibal Lecter-ass scarecore. And then his second episode sees him believe that Ramsey's food is shit, asks to fly over to ghettos during the reward, talks to the guards for some reason, then talks back to Ramsey, and finally gets thrown out of the kitchen and decides to quit. But not before saying that Ramsey can take his shoes. I'm gonna be real with you guys, the main reason Andrew is this low down on the list is because I think his edit is too silly for me. I know this sounds weird, especially considering that I have previously talked about my love for Raj, even to the extent I made a full-on shit post about him, but Andrew's edit is just way too over the top for me to really enjoy, even in an ironic sense. Like, I just think from the beginning, his whole serial killer edit was what initially turned me off to him, because I think it was just too weird. And then add on to the second episode where it feels like he has several different edits at once, and I'm just left wondering who the hell he is. I know it seems unfair to rank him this low solely because I think the edit is weird, but there's such a thing as too weird, and I think Andrew has unfortunately passed that threshold.
It's done, it's over with. You might as well just give me the prize.
Who are you? Look, I can name off a lot of the first boots pretty damn easily because a lot of them at the very least have something to them. Hell, even Dominic, who I feel is one of the more forgettable first boots in my opinion, at least he's notable for being dreamy in Ramsey's words. Stacy? The most she does is name off who she cooked for before failing to cook scallops and get sent home. I just summed her up in one sentence right there. I don't even have any jokes for her because she's delivered that little impact.
Chef Ramsey, you're a little slutty.
Jamie is also what I called Koi 2.0, and that she's not the first boot and doesn't do a whole lot. Really, the most of a highlight she has is in the first episode where she becomes the first person to call Ramsey a slut, which, looking back on it, pretty much foreshadows how horny this season is, and then serves a toothpick in her dish. Then throughout the rest of the season, she's unimpressive and gets eliminated quickly. A tiny bit more than Stacy, but really it's only because Jamie isn't the first boot.
I wanted to fucking slap his ass.
Holy fuck, finally, a chef that actually has some meat on him that isn't rotten. It only took us about 4 entries, and the meat is only barely there, but it's there nonetheless. Mike immediately makes an impression by cosplaying Corey Grace if he decides to cosplay John Travolta, as well as having a Hell's Kitchen tattoo that he shows off, so you can tell that he's a fan of the show. Unfortunately, him being a fan of the show does not translate well to being good in the kitchen, as he ends up being one of the blue team's most consistently weak chefs. He's also the first victim of Captain Scott's unwanted help as seen in the first service. His second episode ends up being his downfall, where he takes 43 minutes to send his first risotto, which is pretty much a death sentence in Hell's Kitchen, and he gets eliminated from the winning team. Admittedly, not a whole lot still, but compared to the others I just talked about, he's definitely better than them.
I have 2 goals in Hell's Kitchen, and one is to win, and my second is to sleep with Holly.
Man, I'm sorry. I know that Jay's well respected nowadays, and I know he's super successful as well, but to be honest, if we're only taking it as Season 7 role, I really don't think he's that good. Like, don't get me wrong, he's good in the kitchen, but to be honest, the way I can describe his run is in 2 different halves. His first half sees him just exist for the most part, and the second half is him wanting to bang Holly. By the way, to steal a phrase from Deadlock, by the way, watch New Legacy Inc., you won't regret it, Jay is probably the most fucked fucker in a season full of fucked fuckers. Like, a good chunk of his quotes in the latter half of the season is just how much he wants to bang Holly. Like, my guy, we get it, and we totally understand, but chill. Also, when it comes to the latter half of the season, where he's not pitching a tent about Holly, he's pitching a fit about Autumn saying she's annoying. And I mean, she talks a lot, but Jesus Christ, from the amount of confessionals Jay has where he says he hates Autumn, there was actually a point in time where I was wondering who he actually talked about more, her or Holly. Add on to the fact he hangs around with Benjamin for the most part, and you have a chef who went from being pretty meh for the most part, to being near insufferable, and he doesn't even have the benefit of being that interesting in the first place. Really, the best thing he has going for him in my opinion are the nicknames he's called that can be pretty funny, and his eventual rise is something I guess, but outside of that, yeah.
It's a MILF outfit. You know what a MILF is?
No.
It's a mother I'd like to fuck.
You are so stupid.
So, Fran. Fran's someone who kind of falls into that category of chefs that I can acknowledge the fair amount of stuff in their season, but at the same time I don't have a lot to say about them. From the very start, Fran is pretty shit in the kitchen and one of the red team's weakest links. Like, she's so shit that I would safely bet she would be the first boot in a lot of seasons, even some of the less talented ones. Really, the one thing that keeps her from going out early are some lucky breaks, and the fact she works extremely hard. This hard work eventually does pay off when she gets best of the worst in the 5th episode for about 10 minutes because she immediately dicks it up by nominating Noka instead of Scott. Oh well, at least that's the benefit of sending home Maria. From there on, Fran never emerges as a potential winner pick ever again, and she makes it all the way to 8th place. Like I said, Fran's someone I admittedly don't have a lot to say about. She had a bit of an underdog at it, but it was painfully obvious she didn't have a chance in hell. I guess I do respect the fight, but that's about it. Also, she's the first person in Hell's Kitchen to say MILF, so that adds her to the fucked fucker list.
The difference between Benjamin and myself is Benjamin has been classically French trained. He loves French everything. Fuck the French!
Siobhan is a rather interesting case, because she's only down this far because of what she isn't. She starts out being one of the stronger chefs on the red team, but it doesn't take long for a flaw of hers to become noticeable, and it's her inability to stand up for herself. It starts out with with the egg challenge, but more or less ends for a while after gets switched over to the blue team, and from there on, the most interesting thing she does is reveal she previously did S&M. There's an irony here that I'm assuming that she's the S in that, but she's also the one who can't stand up for herself. Speaking of which, Benjamin joins the team and pretty much becomes her biggest hater. Like, he says she's passionless, not good in the kitchen, her dreads are dirty, her shoes are whack, and it's not his personal opinion, it's his professional opinion. So how does she respond to Benjamin pushing her around? She just makes notes in her confessional and doesn't do anything, and it ends up biting her in the end when Benjamin takes over her station and she doesn't fight it. Man, I'm not gonna lie, Siobhan is only down this far because she's more disappointing than anything. I feel like Siobhan had the signs of a classic underdog run. Maybe not a winner run, but she was likable, she stands out appearance-wise, she has a storyline of sorts where she's pushed around, she's not even that bad in the kitchen. Overall, she seemed like someone who had a chance to get further if they were just more confident. But that's the thing. She never gains that confidence. She never gains that backbone that will really push her. She just keels over and allows people to push her around. And I think it's so disappointing because I wanted to root for her. I wanted to see her succeed. I wanted to see her prove chefs like Benjamin wrong. But she just didn't fight back. I like Siobhan overall, I really do, but seeing how disappointing her run turned out to be is what unfortunately brings her down for me.
We don't talk about food, we talk about sex.
So, little fun fact, when I do the ranking videos, I try rewatching the season to take notes on the chefs to help with writing things out and jokes in general. Holly is the chef I took the least amount of notes on that made it into the top 10. I've only written like 5 notes for her, and that's for the chef who ends up winning in the end. Yeah, I know I mentioned it earlier, but this season's cast is not one I'm very crazy about. I'm trying to make jokes of some kind, I really am, but it's so hard when nearly everyone is just so uninteresting. I'm sorry for anyone who likes this cast, but honestly, I don't really like this season that much nowadays. Like again, it has its moments, but Jesus Christ, outside of a few moments, this season just has barely anything going for it. Anyway, Holly starts out with a shitty signature dish and barely any screen time until around halfway through the season where she starts to prove herself and have a showmance with Jay. She goes on to win against him in the finale despite Jay and Benjamin underestimating her. She's nice, and I do think her win is definitely unexpected, but my god, she's so uninteresting. I'd be more forgiving if it were a chef who didn't win, but Holly won the season, and she's still this uninteresting in a cast that isn't even that interesting to begin with. For fuck's sake, the most I remember about her is her porn collection.
I'm not afraid to be the bitch. I'm not afraid to be the villain. That doesn't bother me. I'm here to win.
Autumn is super strange to me. Like, really strange to me. Autumn starts out not fantastic. At the start of the season, she's rather overconfident and smug, and add on to the fact she's not someone to take responsibility for her mistakes, and she quickly becomes one of the Red Team's most disliked members. This also causes her to be nominated quite a bit without much cause at all, even to the extent she tied the record for most nominations in a single season. However, a passionate plea from her, one of the best in my opinion, ultimately allows her to stay another day and even get switched to the blue team. She actually does pretty well there initially, mainly because Jay doesn't have his hate boner out, although he definitely gets another type of boner involving her. Unfortunately for her, after another spiral again switched back to the red team, she ends up getting nominated a lot more for, get this, talking a lot. And this is immediately where I think Autumn kind of falls for me. I understand that she's sympathetic here, especially since Benjamin and Jay are pretty much trash talking her and believing she isn't ready, although in Jay's case I'm pretty sure it's because she cock-blocked him. And Holly's about as interesting as tissue paper, but I think as the season progressed, she kind of started to fall into one trait. That trait being, she talks a lot. I'm not saying that trait is bad, not at all, but considering I've seen several chefs who were underdogs in their season, some of which are in my all-time favorites, that naturally means that Autumn is up against some very stiff competition. And unfortunately, she falls pretty short for me because I feel she's just not as interesting in the latter half of the season. It's a shame when she was at her most unlikable is when she was at her most interesting. And it's an even bigger shame that means that by default, my favorite member of the Final Four is...
It's not my personal opinion, this is my professional opinion. When I tell you something, it's not because I'm trying to undercut you, but you don't have the experience that I have.
Wow, I've got some explaining to do here. So Benjamin actually starts out pretty good. He's likable and chill for the most part. He doesn't really have any bad sides to him. Overall, I'd say he's pretty good. And I definitely say I enjoyed him at that point. Hell, I would even say his first half of his first episode on the red team isn't that bad. Like, yeah, he complains a bit, but after he wins a challenge with them, you know what? I think he's still fine. And hell, it's not like he has a reason to be annoyed with being on their team. I mean, they suck. Things unfortunately take a far worse turn when Benjamin all of a sudden starts to act like a massive dick. He gets condescending, arrogant, and really starts to talk to Siobhan. Even worse, he starts speaking French, and that's something we should all be terrified of. Oh, and he's also still very good in the kitchen, meaning he has a reasonable chance to win despite being as fun to watch as the Hindenburg. However, after he gets a haircut that turns him from Shaggy Rogers to Macaulay Culkin, this man starts to tank hard. He goes quiet in service, messes up more often than not, and all the while, he's joining on the Autumn hate bandwagon, driven by Corporal Blue Dick. Oh, and speaking of which, he ends up screwing over Jay in the files because he couldn't stop inserting his opinion into everything. I know it seems weird to have Benjamin up this high, especially considering the latter half of his run sees him act like a major prick and be completely full of shit, but there's just a few things working in his favor for me. For one, like I mentioned earlier, Benjamin didn't start out that bad. He was likable at the start, and if I just got that version of Benjamin all the way through, I'd probably put him in, I don't know, maybe my top 3. Second, I think Benjamin's a pretty good villain. I don't think he's a phenomenal villain because sometimes he can be pretty insufferable and not in a good way, but he's a threat for the most part and his downfall is pretty satisfying. He's kind of like Jen in a way where they start off pretty good and likable, but around halfway through the season they just get more unlikable until their downfall. The final part that puts him up this high is because out of the final 4, he's just the most interesting to me. Like, I'm sorry, I know has her moments and Jay is super successful again, but once the former starts speaking Japanese, I just lose interest in her, and Lyra I just never liked all that much. Oh, and Holly's there too, I guess. Yeah, it's those 3 factors that bring Benjamin up that high, but it's also his latter half of his season run that really hurts him.
Fist pump, come and get you. How you like me now?
Ed is someone that I honestly don't have a lot to say about. He's got a bit of a fan base, and I do like him, but I only say it's more of a mild like at best, and I think it's because he doesn't really stand out a whole lot to me throughout the season. Like, okay, he starts out relatively strong by being the guy who helps complete the first dinner service, and add on to him being relatively chill and humble, so he's got a good shot. But then his fortunes start changing in perhaps the most out of nowhere way, showing his penis. And this moment ends up being a turn-off for his chances of winning because the mistakes pile up due to him panicking over and over again, and one last particularly bad night on Fish seals his fate. Ed is, man, Ed's hard to talk about despite the fact he's in my top 5. The way I can describe him is like, he's like a chocolate bar. I like chocolate. Hell, I really like chocolate. But if you were to put a bunch of foods that I like on a table, including the chocolate bar, I'm not immediately going to go for the chocolate bar. Overall, compared to a lot of chefs I've already talked about, Ed's fine. Not spectacular and nowhere close to my favorite, but he's fine.
How many ladies have you slept with? I don't know.
Now, this is going to be interesting. For long-time viewers, you may remember that I talked about Salvatore in my top 10 chefs from seasons 1 through 9. Yet, he's not in my top 3 despite me previously adoring him and clearly a lot of other people as well having the same opinion. Well, let's get into his run before I explain why he's not in the top 3. So Salvatore, from the very start, is one of the weaker chefs on the team. He constantly messes up in the kitchen, yet he manages to avoid nomination for some reason. I'm guessing he has maxed out charisma. However, after a near quit and admitted to Ramsay he never went to school, he does manage to have an acceptable service in the 4th episode. Unfortunately, he goes right back to sucking, and he's ultimately eliminated from the winning team in an elimination that even the blue team knew was coming. So yeah, again, Salvatore was previously a chef I held in pretty high regard, but obviously not anymore. Well, that's not to say I don't like him anymore, because I do like him. I think he's super charming, he's quirky, unironically really good looking, sympathetic. Overall, I think Salvatore is good. I guess the thing is that I gradually lost a bit of interest in him kind of upon more rewatches, and I think the other 3 chefs just stood out to me a bit more. Still, I like Salvatore, just not as much nowadays.
I took very good care of Salvatore. I love you.
I'm not going to lie, I think Jason was one of the chefs I was genuinely surprised I liked on rewatches more the second time around. He's a mostly uninteresting chef in terms of overall run. Hell, the most interesting thing he has done is blow up at Jay for nominating him and struggle with communication. I don't even really have a whole lot to say about him, to be honest. However, the main reason he's in the top 3 is because, to be honest, I think he's pretty damn funny. Actually, I think his style of humor is also very interesting. Unlike a lot of chefs who are mostly comedic that are pretty in your face about it, Jason's comedic moments are pretty low-key, and I think that's because Jason delivers a large chunk of his lines with about as much energy as a funeral service. Like, here's an example. One of the funniest moments of the season that I've seen tend to go over a lot of people's heads is when Jason tries to do a stick-up at the store of some vegetable of some kind. Already funny in of itself, but Jason delivers it in such a deadpan way that what makes a pretty funny moment already, for any person saying it, become 10 times funnier. Jason is, in my opinion, one of the more underrated funny guys in Hell's Kitchen. He's not as funny as someone like Jim from the previous season, but I'd say he's up there, and one of my favorites.
It'll be a struggle for me to be a cook amongst other cooks because I've become accustomed to being a chef amongst cooks. I would be embarrassed to finish second place.
I'm gonna have to do a lot, and I mean a lot, of explaining of this one. Season 7 Scott, to many people, is one of the most notorious chefs in the show's history. He barely takes accountability for his mistakes, is about as helpful as a bear hug to an Iron Maiden, and perhaps most notable of all, egotistical to an almost insufferable degree. He's pretty much the poster child for chefs who believe they're way better than they actually are. So why is he number 2? It's simple really. I think he's hilarious. I've always had this sort of ironic love for chefs who are super arrogant but also really shitty in the kitchen, because 9 times out of 10 don't make themselves look stupid in absolutely spectacular ways. As such, Scott's arrogance tend to result in some of the biggest laughs I've had all season, which aside from Jason and sometimes Salvatore, isn't really much. His ego is so insufferable and yet so over the top that it loops around from being potentially annoying to absolutely hilarious. His first confessional, where he's giving this Captain America sounding ass speech while some inspirational music plays in the background, it just kills me every time because even the show knows he's full of shit. As such, a lot of his short run season boasted about his skills and not backing them up, all while he continues to believe he's the strongest chef there. The strangest thing, however, is that there's a weird part of me that feels some of what he does is in earnest, like when he helped Salvatore out and gave him confidence to deliver a good service. I don't think he's a bad guy at heart, despite all the ego. But I haven't even gotten to the best part about him, and it's his elimination. God, his elimination is what I consider the most satisfying in the show's history, more than any Elise elimination. He goes on another spiel about how the team will die without him, only for Ramsey to cut him off and eliminate him right there. It's just so perfect for a chef like him. Yeah, I know this might be an unpopular opinion, and feel free to throttle me, but Scott's arrogance that is so massive that it borders on hilarity is what puts him up this high for me.
Madams! Madam! Madam!
Yes, chef!
Take your jacket off and fuck off!
Oh, chef, don't say that, please!
She feels alive. Everyone else feels like they're doing their best Schrodinger's cat impression on being interesting or not, but I really don't think that applies to Nilka. She consistently feels like she's doing a lot in the season. Like early on, she establishes herself as one of the stronger members of the red team, even managing to get best of the best in the 4th episode. Add on to the fact she's pretty much the chef on the red team who seemingly talks the most sense, as seen when she cooks Scott right before his elimination, and she might have a shot at winning. But we all know what happened, and man, I'm kinda mixed on it. Okay, so after being a pretty decent performer overall and seemingly having a chance to make it to the Black Jackets at least, the 10th episode sees her completely disintegrate so badly that she gets ejected. It's a genuinely shocking ejection, especially considering that up to this point, she had never seemed to be in danger of going home. Hell, the only time she was nominated was when Fran put her up over Scott, and even then, she was sent back in line really quickly. So to see her not only crash out like this, but also get ejected on top of that, it's just really shocking and heartbreaking. I know that some people get a kick out of this elimination, and I understand why. It's an iconic elimination, but man, I liked Nilka. I really wanted her to go further, and sure, I don't think she was going to win, but I wanted to believe. At least Ramsey talked to her before she left, which is something he's never done for a competitor who got ejected before or since. But yeah, even if the way she left was shocking and sad, I still like Nilka. I wouldn't say she's among my all-time favorites, but she is my personal favorite chef of Season 7. Finally, Season 7's cast is officially in the books. I'm not going to lie, this season was probably the hardest to really get done so far. Not just because I've recently gotten busy with college and work, but it's because this season's cast is about as fun to watch as the floor. From how boring a lot of the cast is, to how even the top 2 I wouldn't even really consider among my all-time favorites, I'm gonna be honest, this might be my least favorite cast so far. Anyway, here's the final rankings for the cast of Season 7. And that'll be it for me. If you like this video and want to see more like this, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. EternalOpossum out.